A trade got agreed to a month ago. Two teams shook hands on it. The player packed his bags, at least in theory. And as of right now, it still hasn't happened. And there's a real chance it never does. This is the strangest trade in basketball right now, because it isn't actually stuck on basketball at all. It's stuck on a soccer team in Rhode Island, a bankrupt banking startup, and an investigation that's already lasted almost a year with no end in sight. Two franchises agreed on every detail of this deal over a month ago, and neither one can actually finish it. Let's go through exactly how we got here, what's actually holding this up, and what happens next depending on how it breaks. Welcome to Hoops Detailing. Let's get started. To understand why this trade is stuck, you have to go back to what Kawhi Leonard actually wanted this offseason, which was pretty simple. He wanted to stay with the Los Angeles Clippers. Leonard turned 35 in June, coming off the best statistical season of his career. 27.9 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 3.6 assists, a game over 65 games. That's not a decline phase stat line. That's a player playing some of the best basketball of his life, at an age most stars are already fading. He had 1 year left on his contract, worth just over $50 million. What he needed from the Clippers was a long-term extension, some sign that the organization was building its future around him, the way team president Lawrence Frank had promised at his end-of-season press conference back in April, when he said the plan was to win with Kawhi. The Clippers didn't follow through on that promise. According to reporting from ESPN, Leonard's own representatives made it clear to other teams that he'd only consider signing an extension with the Toronto Raptors if Los Angeles wasn't going to make that long-term commitment themselves. The Clippers, for their part, made no such commitment. Leonard reportedly preferred to stay right where he was. This wasn't a player angling for a way out. The organization simply didn't give him a reason to stay long-term. So the door opened for a trade that, on paper, looked like a clean, mutually agreed-upon path forward for everyone involved. On June 30th, the Clippers and Raptors agreed to send Leonard back to Toronto, the city where he won his first championship and Finals MVP back in 2019, averaging 28.5 points a game in that Finals series against Golden State. It was, and still is, the only championship in franchise history for the Raptors, and Leonard was the singular reason they got there. In exchange, the Clippers would receive forward Brandon Ingram, guard Grady Dick, unprotected first-round picks in 2031 and 2033, a first-round pick swap in 2027, and 2 additional second-round picks. It's worth pausing on the shape of this deal for a second, because it's genuinely a lot for a 35-year-old on an expiring contract. Ingram is a 28-year-old all-star forward in his own right, averaging 21.5 points and 5.6 rebounds in his 1 season in Toronto, and Grady Dick was the 13th overall pick in the 2023 draft, averaging 9.2 points over his first 3 NBA seasons. Toronto wasn't just betting on one more good season from Leonard. They were paying a real, substantial price in actual NBA talent and draft capital to get him back, with plans to negotiate a 2-year extension once he actually arrived in Toronto. Under normal circumstances, this deal gets processed, both rosters adjust, and everyone moves on to training camp in September. That's not what happened here, and the reason why has almost nothing to do with anything that occurred on a basketball court. Here's where the story stops being about basketball at all. Back in September of last year, journalist Pablo Torre published reporting on his podcast, raising a serious question: had the Clippers circumvented the NBA's salary cap by funneling extra money to Leonard through a $28 million endorsement deal with a company called Aspiration, a green banking startup that also happened to have its own $300 million, 23-year endorsement deal directly with the Clippers organization itself? Aspiration has since filed for bankruptcy, which only made the arrangement look more questionable in hindsight. The NBA opened a formal investigation into the arrangement, handled by outside counsel rather than the league office itself. And because that investigation was still active when the June 30th trade was agreed to, the deal couldn't simply go through on schedule. The new league year began on July 6th, and the trade still couldn't be processed, because approving it would have meant the Raptors were accepting the risk of whatever penalties might eventually land on Leonard's contract if the investigation found wrongdoing. On July 9th, both teams made it official. The trade was on hold. In their own statement, the Raptors said the league had informed them they'd be assuming the risk of any outcome tied to the investigation if they finalized the deal now, so they chose to wait instead, adding that they remained eager to bring Kawhi back to Toronto and were hoping for a swift resolution for their players, organization, and fans. The Clippers echoed that, saying in a statement to ESPN that the trade could only be completed if Toronto's ownership group was willing to accept that risk directly. Neither side was willing to just push forward blind. Here's the part that should genuinely worry anyone hoping this gets resolved quickly. It isn't slowing down. If anything, it's expanding. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver has publicly said the investigation needs to be wrapped up before the beginning of next season. But as of the most recent reporting, there's no indication that timeline is actually going to hold. ESPN's Baxter Holmes reported that the investigation could realistically stretch all the way into 2027 if the league, the Clippers, and the National Basketball Players Association can't agree on the findings or on any proposed punishment. If that happens, the whole thing goes to arbitration, which would draw this out even further, with no clear endpoint in sight. Sources close to the Players Union have already said they wouldn't hesitate to take the matter to arbitration themselves if the league tries to hand down penalties without what they consider sufficient evidence. And just this week, Pablo Torre released another podcast episode adding a completely new wrinkle to the story, reporting that Leonard holds a secret ownership stake in a soccer team based in Rhode Island. It's a strange, almost unrelated sounding detail on its surface, the kind of thing that would normally have nothing to do with an NBA trade at all. But it's exactly the kind of thing that keeps this investigation from wrapping up cleanly. Every new report seems to open another thread rather than closing one, and that pattern has now repeated itself for almost a full year. This coming Monday actually marks the 11-month anniversary of Torre's very first podcast episode on this story. Not quite a full year yet, but close enough that it's easy to see why people keep asking when it's finally going to end. An investigation that most people around the league assumed would take a few weeks has now dragged on for the better part of a year, with league officials themselves admitting there's no clear finish line in sight. As CBS Sports put it recently, this has become one of the most complicated investigations the league has ever undertaken. Not just because of what it might mean for Leonard and the Clippers, but because of what it signals to every other team watching. If the NBA lets this slide without real consequences, it tells every other franchise exactly how far they can push the salary cap rules before anyone actually does anything about it. There's something almost fitting about how unresolved this whole situation is, because Leonard's career has always moved in these same short, decisive bursts, followed by long stretches of uncertainty. He was traded to Toronto by the San Antonio Spurs back in July of 2018, played exactly one season there, won the title, and then left as a free agent to sign with the Clippers before Toronto ever got the chance to build a real long-term plan around him. Now, 7 years later, the same basic pattern is playing out again, except this time, it's not Leonard walking away on his own terms. It's an outside investigation deciding the timeline for him. It's worth remembering, too, that this isn't the first time rival executives and reporters have spent an off-season trying to guess where Leonard would actually end up. Back before he ever signed with the Clippers in the first place, insiders spent months debating whether he'd stay in Toronto, jump to the Lakers, or head elsewhere entirely. Uncertainty around Kawhi Leonard's next move isn't new. What's new is that, this time, the uncertainty has nothing to do with Leonard's own decision-making at all. So let's actually answer the question in the title. Could this trade genuinely fall apart completely? Yes. And there's a real, specific way that happens. If the investigation concludes that Leonard's contract itself needs to be voided as a penalty, the Clippers simply cannot trade a contract that no longer legally exists. That's the doomsday scenario for this deal, and it's not a hypothetical anyone close to the situation is dismissing outright. Short of that, a relatively minor suspension probably wouldn't kill the trade. The Raptors would likely just absorb it and move forward as planned. But a longer suspension, or a drawn-out arbitration and appeals process, creates exactly the kind of prolonged uncertainty neither team can plan around. Leonard is 35, has a well-documented history of missing significant time to injury, And by CBS Sports' own description, this upcoming season may represent his best remaining shot at being a genuine high-level contributor on a title contender. Every month this drags on is a month neither team actually gets to use him, and time is the one thing a 35-year-old player genuinely cannot get back. There's also a real roster wrinkle worth mentioning, separate from all the legal uncertainty. If the trade does eventually go through, the Raptors would only have 13 players under contract on their 15-man roster, since they're sending both Ingram and Dick away as part of the deal. The league requires a minimum of 14 players during the regular season, so Toronto would need to go out and sign at least one more player just to meet that roster minimum. A small logistical problem on its own, but one more small sign of how much simply sits frozen while this investigation drags on, month after month, with no end date anyone can actually point to. If the investigation wraps up without major penalties attached to Leonard's contract, the path forward is actually pretty straightforward. The trade gets processed as originally agreed. Leonard heads back to Toronto to chase a second championship in the city where he won his first, and the Raptors immediately begin extension talks to try to lock him in beyond this single season, exactly as Chris Haynes reported was already the plan. For the Clippers, this becomes a full reset. Ingram returns to Los Angeles, where his career actually began with the Lakers back in 2016, before 3 seasons there and 6 more with New Orleans, and Grady Dick joins a Clippers roster that's already been reshaped this offseason. They separately traded away center Ivica Zubac to Indiana for Benedict Mathurin, signaling a franchise that's already thinking about what comes after Leonard, whether this specific trade closes or not. Los Angeles isn't just standing still waiting on a legal outcome. They're actively building out their next era in parallel with all of this. So here's my question for you. Do you think this trade actually gets completed before the season starts? Or does this investigation drag things out long enough that the whole thing collapses entirely? And if it does fall apart, does Leonard actually stay a Clipper for one more year? Or does this whole saga just start over again with a different team by next summer? Drop your prediction in the comments, and I'll come back and check who called it correctly once we actually get a resolution. And if you want to see how this story ends, make sure you're subscribed, because I'll be tracking every update until this one is finally settled, however long that actually takes.